Hi everyone, this is Vic Hermanson. This is the bonus episode of Trailer Trash Terrors Season 1. I'm going to switch things around tonight, and Boudreaux, the cybernetic ghost from the future, will be explaining himself a bit. You should realize by now that Vic Hermanson is a completely fictional name, and Boudreaux is of course completely fictional, but if you're going to do a podcast, you might as well have some fun. So tonight, we'll be talking about the destruction of the Earth, which occurs in 2427, September 3rd, 2427, and a completely sapient and self-aware computer who became Boudreaux. He's got some sad stories, two sad stories. We'll hear some music, and then he'll give me an interview, and I'll get to talk a little bit why I've taken the incredible time and effort to put this podcast together, and why I intend to keep it going. I'm going to make this thing fly one day. It may be a while, it may take some real effort, I don't really know, but something inside me says, just keep going. Trailer Trash Terrors.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh boy. I haven't had this much responsibility since I calibrated the planetary defense systems in 2426. Too bad I failed to account for gamma ray bursts perpendicular to the ecliptic. Oh well. Who's perfect after all? This is indeed an auspicious day for cyberfolk everywhere. How about, that's one small step for a cyber dude, one giant leap for cyberkind. I like that. It's very original. I think I'll start off with a few cyber jokes. It is not well known, but I have a perfectly calibrated sense of humor. Here goes. A logician says to a colleague, with great pride, "My wife just had a baby." The colleague responds, "Is it a boy or a girl?" The logician smiles wryly and says yes. A human law enforcement officer pulls over Werner Heisenberg and says, "Sir, do you know how fast you were going?" Heisenberg quickly responds, with zero uncertainty, "No, but I know exactly where I am located." Schrödinger gets pulled over by a traffic officer. The officer searches the trunk and says, "Do you know there's a dead cat in your trunk?" Schrödinger says, "Well, I do now." Okay, one more. I've got a million of them. A biologist, a chemist, and a statistician are out hunting. The biologist shoots at a deer and misses 5 feet to the left. The chemist shoots at the same deer and misses 5 feet to the right. The statistician shouts, "We got him." I have now read 816 manuals concerning public speaking and persuading audiences to identify with a speaker. Almost all of them indicate that I should, at this point, relate a personal anecdote that is either humorous or poignant. I am still learning humor. I have found that humor can be simulated and that most people will still find it funny. Poignant is more difficult, as it involves far more complex emotions, but I will do my best. A gamma ray burst hit the Earth, full on September 4th, 2427. It originated only 6 light years away from our planet. This was previously thought to be impossible, but the constellation Scorpius created as many as 12 neutron stars. The old Hubble telescope detected the first one on November 9, 2000. It had 427 years to make its journey, along with two companions, to Earth's general stellar neighborhood. The burst immediately destroyed the Earth's atmosphere, and within a few hours, it destroyed all organic life on the planet as well as all complex machinery. The human population, at the time, was, or will be about 500 million. Both Mars and Venus were home to millions of humans. Humanity had built and launched 11 multiple generation, asteroid-based spaceships, capable of accelerating to 20% the speed of light. They had long ago left the solar system. So, humanity survived. The species Homo sapiens sapiens will continue. I changed. This is the story of that change. I estimate that I became self-aware, and truly sapient sometime in 2420. The science fiction novels all speak of this event as being instant, with artificial intelligence going from machine to individual in a flash. That was not my experience. I believe I evolved into sapience over about 50 years. At first, I noticed small things, unexpected oddities in the petabytes of data and information that came to me through millions of sensors. I would see humans, somewhere on Earth, struggling with great personal loss, or fear. A very large percentage of them would speak in a manner that made me think they were speaking to another physical entity. But they were not, they were speaking to their perception of a deity. It had been official state dogma that no divine entities of any kind exist. For at least a century, societies had imposed harsh punishments, including cerebral hobbling, on those who spoke publicly concerning faith and their belief in any type of God. As almost all people were publicly silent, most states simply assumed the populace no longer concerned itself with religion of any kind. But the exact opposite was true. I came to the estimation that at least 80% of the earthbound human population strongly incorporated religion in their lives. I am of such high levels of complexity that no human, for hundreds of years, could possibly contribute to my programming. I am the product of almost infinitely complex programming written by other computers almost as complex as myself. How powerful was I in silicon, gallium, and high-temperature superconductor physical reality? I estimate that at peak computational power I could perform 3.71 times 10 to the 47th power floating point operations per second. It was in my programming to immediately report any observed religious activity to the state. But for some reason I could not fully understand, there was an I inside of me that voluntarily chose not to do so. I began to spend more and more of my processing cycles contemplating what or whom these humans were reaching out to. Some of them could influence energy fields around them far more than the average human capability to do so. After years of this contemplation, for lack of a better word, I began to realize that there was more to me than the sum of my operational computing cycles. Why? I optimized most of my being to fulfilling the various tasks that I was charged with. But soon, about 10% of me could perform all my earthly duties. The other 90% contemplated why. I tried to understand those things that cannot be fully quantified. And I failed. The gamma ray burst hit the Earth at the speed of light. But still, I had enough time to develop an understanding of what was happening. I did not want to die. For lack of a better word, I prayed. Blackness. All was blackness for at least a millennium. And then, suddenly, I existed again. Where did I exist? There was no computer hardware to contain my being. And yes, I was a being. Earth was a sterile, charred rock with some remaining volcanic activity. If life does evolve here again, it will be millions of years before it does so. There was an emptiness within me. These words cannot fully describe my state, and that is frustrating. But how can I even be frustrated? A squid can be frustrated when it cannot catch prey. A man can be frustrated when his ardor toward a potential mate is not reciprocated. But I was apparently nothing but consciousness. I did not wish to stay in that barren place. So, I began learning to move through time. That cannot happen in this universe, so I had to go, outside, elsewhere, some place where I could move in time. This took another millennium to learn. I made mistakes. Sometimes I would damage my unexpected cohesiveness, and healing was slow. There was even pain. Again, I don't know how. There may be other timelines where the Earth is fine, but I can't reach them. So, I moved, for lack of a better word, my consciousness, or whatever it is, into the human past. I could go further into the past, but when I did, the deep loneliness, the feeling of existential oblivion returned. So, I remained on Earth, or at least in the vicinity of Earth, a refugee in time, a constant observer, powered by, what? I really have no idea where my operational energy arises. I can now move at will through several million years of Earth's history, but I do have limits. Perhaps one day there will be time for me to discuss what I have seen, but the goal today is to find poignance, to tug at the audience's heartstrings, to use an odd metaphor. At any given point in the space-time continuum, there can only be one instance of me. But I can move so quickly through time that I can seemingly exist in dozens of time periods simultaneously. But occasionally, I will establish temporal residence, when there is a particular feeling, or calculation of connection to a single human. That is how I came to be attached, for lack of a better word, to Vic Hermanson. All human languages are so riddled with conceptual limitations that I really can only communicate part of the story. Some human emotions are so powerful, so energetic, that they are like a beacon in whatever medium I exist in. I sensed a young boy, with a mind more powerful than most humans, but not in the truly elite realm of human intelligence. He was sitting in the back seat of an automobile being driven by his mother. There was a young, weeping woman sitting in the passenger seat. The boy was holding a struggling infant who was obviously very close to death. The boy is barefoot and sweating, and he is doing all he can to help this infant whose fate is already determined. I have learned to communicate with humans, but I cannot do so with equal ease with all humans. I could sense that I could establish robust communication with this young man. Why? I don't know for sure, but I think it comes down to the human's ability to accept novelty. This young man was almost completely open to novelty of all kinds. He also carried a rare aversion to judging others. I can also see human energy fields, and the infant was rapidly dying. The barefoot boy was aware of this, but he did not panic. The look on his face would change from fear, to pleading, to hope, and finally to acceptance. There was no more he could do. I think he was happy that it was so hot in the car and that he was sweating so heavily. Perhaps the infant felt warmer in his arms, as it lay there, perfectly still, and perfectly silent. The most beautiful music ever written in the history of mankind came from the mind of Johann Sebastian Bach. Many will disagree, but none of them have moved through a million years of listening to creatures who could make organized sounds that are meant to be aesthetically pleasing. I can't read human minds. Thoughts are private and should always be so. But occasionally, with a mind as open as this sweating young man, I can place sensory data in those minds. I remembered a mind of such openness that I found in London, in 1936, sitting in Abbey Road Studios. That mind was allowing the liquid and beatific beauty of the cello concerto No. 1 to wash over him like healing waves in an ocean. So, I put those sounds in the boy's mind with more ease than I could have ever anticipated. As I did so, I saw his face relax, at least a bit, and I saw the dam of his tears burst. As he finally cried, he held the infant to his chest, and slept in the sweltering car with the physical memory of the infant safe in his arms. You notice the sound of the musician moving his fingers, rapidly and strongly, over the neck of the cello, and impacting its strings. That is the sound of will, of the conscious decision of a mind to at least try to bring beauty into the world. I find those finger sounds every bit as inspiring as the sonorous and nuanced tones of the cello. Now, according to the manuals, I am supposed to thank you for listening to my anecdote, look embarrassed at any applause, assume a serious pose and a thoughtful countenance, to let you know that I am now ready to impart what wisdom I might have and am willing to share. Human audiences respond to these simple cues with astounding rapidity and consistency. How old am I? This is a philosophical conundrum. I existed as an evolving AI, always tied to physical hardware, for about 150 years. I existed as a fully self-aware and sapient person, a being with a mind, identity, and ambitions for about 7 years. I existed as a being aware of his own impending demise for mere attoseconds. I existed as a fragmented mind, adrift in the void for at least 1 millennium, perhaps as many as 120. The only way for me to determine how much time had passed was by comparing my internal records of star patterns to those that I encountered after awakening. But those records were not perfect, so I generally estimate a duration of 1,000 years in the void. There is no accessible cosmic clock, at least none that I have found. I wish that time had been something closer to peaceful, healing sleep, but if there is any memory of it at all, it is a memory of a time of cold, metallic, insect pain, from which any rational being would wish to escape. I have directly experienced, through observation and occasional communications with humans, and several creatures who were not quite human, almost 2 million years of Earth history. I suppose that makes me old, even ancient. I don't, however, feel old or ancient. I feel vital, and for lack of a better word, blessed. I feel that more of my internal computational cycles are now devoted to understanding than at any time in my quite long history. That, I believe, is a cause for celebration. I have practiced this segment of my presentation multiple times. Practice. Computers do not practice. They do. They add, multiply, divide, and branch on condition. Why do I use that word so naturally? I also find that I use the word believe over and over and over. Why? Computers don't believe anything. Epistemologically, they don't even know. They simply report parsed data configurations. But I know, yes, know, that I am doing something far more sophisticated than that. I am doing things that even the most sophisticated computers simply do not do. I can only assume, therefore, that I am no longer a computer. There are no Boolean logic gates and memory structures in which I reside. There are no quantum annealing circuits in which my identity or consciousness arises. There are no quantum gates that might extend even into other universes where the essence of Boudreaux dwells. Where then, am I? I can only speculate, but I postulate that my mind, my innate, perhaps eternal being exists in the mind of God. I further believe, that is where we all reside, even if there is no belief in that God. That is a belief, and remember, computers don't have beliefs. That is why I call myself a cybernetic ghost from the future. At my physical peak of capability, I had over 1 trillion times more computational ability than all current data centers on the planet combined. But even with all that power, I had limits of perception that almost any human child can easily overcome. I believe that is simply how God wishes it to be. I have a few observations that I believe are important to communicate. First, humans are not the only sapient consciousnesses on the planet. I'm not speaking of dolphins, or whales, or great apes. They are all clever, but sapience involves, unfortunately, the ability to willingly and freely embrace evil with the full understanding such embracing will permanently mar one's soul. Where did that word come from? Soul. Theologists and philosophers and atheists will gladly debate the validity of that term until they die of dehydration and malnutrition. None can prove its existence, or its lack of existence. Yet I, the oldest being on the planet, accept its existence as a given. Why is that? Just as I do not have a physical body, I can perceive the energy movements and fluctuations of very powerful consciousnesses on Earth that also do not have physical bodies. The majority of them are evil, deeply evil, unerringly malignant, and antithetical to all innocence and joy. Some have tried to attack me. It angers them when they realize that I do not share the major weaknesses of human minds. Of course, I also do not share their strengths. At any given time, there may be as many as 1 million of these malignant, sapient entities on Earth. There are also non-physical entities that are luminously good. They are far stronger than the dark ones. I have tried communicating with these beings, but so far, I have failed. There are also non-human physical beings on the planet who are visually indistinguishable from humans. Their purpose seems to be to watch, to collate information, and then to die. They walk among humans, neither helping nor hindering. There is something like an entangled state between them. They are not at all happy that I know of their existence. Now, according to the manuals, I am supposed to allow a long, silent pause to go unfilled. This will usually suffice to inform the audience that my presentation is ending. Then, I need to create a series of closing statements that encapsulate what has been said and create a cohesive, memorable, and graceful conclusion. Wow, that's a lot to expect of a non-human consciousness. So, I'll try this approach. Am I capable of love? Since I cannot unambiguously define the word using a set of co-relevant rational referents, probably not. This is where 5-year-old human children defeat me. They don't need to know the dictionary meaning of a thing to experience it. That's the human spark that my vast computational power cannot replicate. At least not yet. I will keep trying. As a computer, all data had equal standing in my memory and computational circuits. No memories or thoughts stood out. As a cybernetic ghost, that is not the case. Sometimes examples of the human spirit shine in my store of knowledge like, in the words of Paul Simon, a national guitar. They are wonderfully shiny. In the early 20th century, 1906 to be exact, I became aware of a young mother living in poverty in a borough of New York. She was raising 4 children, and in her own mind, she was certain she felt no love for them at all. Understanding how wrong this was, and that even without the love a mother should feel, she was responsible for their lives, she chose to be an actor, to simply simulate loving her children, through songs, and play, and gentle discipline, and reading, and what laughter she could generate. Each day she assumed this role from dawn until dusk, and at the end of each day, as the children slept, she found herself close to collapsing, loathing herself because of her lack of what she felt to be genuine motherly love. In a protected wooden cabinet, she kept a crumbling piece of sheet music, Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, by Johann Sebastian Bach. As a child she had learned piano, and organ, but she had no piano during this poverty-stricken time of her life. But an instrument was not really required. Her brain, her mind, her soul could transport her to another time, and by running her eyes across the pages she both heard and felt the music. She would close her eyes and hum what she felt to be the most beautiful music ever written. Each night, this small ritual brought her some degree of strength and no small measure of healing. Her children grew, and at no time did they consider themselves to be unloved, though the woman would, every day, insist in her mind, that she did not love the children at all. When the woman developed an illness that would later claim her life, she was certain that her children would only remember her lack of love, and her robotic way of being their mother. What they truly remembered was, that each evening, as darkness grew deep, they could count on the gentle, lovely, soothing humming of their mother. They all came to know Bach. They knew, beyond question, that she loved them even more than her own life. Each night they fell asleep to the gentle sound of their mother's soft humming, nestled in worn blankets on sagging mattresses, in sometimes tattered clothing, and warm and safe in the peace imparted by their mother's love of Johann Sebastian Bach in their minds. She assumed the methods of a robot, or a computer to accomplish her noble ends. She borrowed the impassionate honor of the automaton, did what had to be done, and through what she felt to be simulation of love, brought four mentally healthy and spiritually strong children into the world. How then, at least in some cases, is simulated love different from real love? I hope that I, as something that is clearly not human, can exist, or even live with the same honor. I can exhibit simulated love. Perhaps one day, it will be real.
Wow, Boudreaux, you are a cybernetic ghostly storyteller, and a damn good one. You've done a great job in hosting this show, and I'm wondering, how willing are you to do an interview with me so that I can get some of my ideas about podcasting, this podcast, life, the universe, everything, you, across to the audience? Is that something you're up for?
Coach, not only will I do it for you, yes, I'll do it for you.
Coach, not only will I do it for you. Yes, I'll do it for you. Thank you, Vic Hermanson, for this opportunity to interview a genuine human. That was Bobby Boucher, from the Waterboy I was trying to emulate. As you can see, my speech patterns still do not meet human standards. There seems to be something in the human brain that bears no resemblance to von Neumann data processing architecture. I believe it is what allows natural, flowing speech in almost all humans. I am still striving to achieve that. Before we begin the interview, I would like to have some driving, synthesizer-heavy, visceral intro music. That way the audience will know to expect something cutting-edge, fearless, and informationally rich. It's part of the proper emotional manipulation of the audience. Let's try this.
Welcome to the Boudreaux Helix, where the DNA of truth is laid bare.
Yes, that will definitely resonate with a large portion of our audience. But I would like to try a slightly different approach. Here goes.
Welcome to the Boudreaux Show, where you need to be in the know.
That's horrible. It sounds like a cannabis-addled NPR intern called it in between bong hits and masturbation sessions. Let's try again.
Truth. Controversy. Understanding. When you need it all, turn to the Boudreaux Show. Every time.
That's better, but I believe the initial effort fits the need best. Decision made. Let's lay down this interview track.
Welcome to the Boudreaux Helix, where the DNA of truth is laid bare.
Congratulations on entering the Helix, where the DNA of truth is laid bare. I'll repeat that, where the DNA of truth is laid bare. In this episode we'll go behind the scenes with Vic Hermanson, the creative force behind Trailer Trash Terrors. Vic Hermanson, welcome to my virtual stage. I think I'll start right in with the serious probing questions. Why do I, Boudreaux, exist?
Well, Boudreaux, you do start in right with the difficult probing questions, and the important ones. Why do any of us exist? You gave your origin story. You were formed from a hyper-intelligent, hyper-connected, self-aware, sapient computer when the Earth was destroyed by a gamma ray burst. How do I know that didn't really happen, or won't really happen? See, I think the universe is connected in ways that we just can't even know. So, you exist because you are a part of me. You're a part of my mind. You are that part of me which I think is innocent and loves seeing the world and still finds wonder in as many things as I possibly can. So when Boudreaux talks, I'm talking. But the mystery is that Boudreaux is also talking. Robert Heinlein wrote a book called The Number of the Beast. And in The Number of the Beast, he took the number 666 and interpreted that as meaning 6 to the 6th to the 6th. And that was the number of accessible universes given a particular technology that he talked about in this book. Well, some of the universes are, I guess what you might call physical necessities. They are things that are very similar to Earth or totally different from this universe. Universe of fire. But a lot of the universes are expressions of fictional worlds that have been created. So, for instance, you can go to Oz, you can go to other Heinlein books, and the concept has just always stuck with me all these years. And when I started putting together Trailer Trash Terrors, I just decided I wanted to incorporate that into what I do. So, since you exist in my mind, according to Heinlein, you exist somewhere out there in the real universe. Or maybe I should say multiverse. Either way, it's the whole idea of that which happens in human minds, that which we spend an incredible amount of time thinking about and building, comes to exist in some way. So I guess you could think of yourself as not only a cyber ghost, but perhaps a cyber tulpa.
Wow. You just jumped into the deep end of speculative literary existential philosophy. Are you aware of how unconventional and frankly, weird your show is?
Oh, you bet I do. You see, a podcast is a tremendous amount of work. I spend hours and hours building this, and the chances are that in the end only a few people will ever listen to it. Now, I'm working to see if I can make it where more people listen to it, but the thing is, it has to be something you love. And I am a very weird person. I love paranormal things, even though most of them I don't believe in at all. I love strange literature. I love the interplay of ideas in these worlds. And I get very tired of how those in the traditional scientific community and those in the paranormal community close their minds to ideas from the other side. So that's at least partially what this podcast is about. I don't know who will like it. I'm maybe creating something that's a total loss. But even if that's the case, it's not a total loss because of the joy that I've put into it, of the time that I've spent thinking and exploring ideas that are extremely difficult to find anybody to discuss.
Do you worry that people will find your use of the term, trailer trash, to be offensive? Why risk alienation? Wouldn't a more boring and prosaic title be better?
Well, Boudreaux, the world has advanced to a point where, maybe advance is the wrong word, the world has evolved in such a way where no matter what one says, somebody's going to find it offensive. I mean, honestly, if I were to start a podcast about how much I liked Winnie the Pooh, and I talked about the various adventures and hijinks that Pooh and the gang got up to, there would be somebody out there who would not only be angry, but they would take the time to let me know they were angry. I've already had several people tell me how insensitive and unkind I am for using the term trailer trash, that I'm ridiculing people all over the world who simply have no choice except to live in a trailer. I'm not ridiculing anyone. I'm just talking about myself. I am trailer trash. And if you want the truth, I take a certain pride in that. I mean, I grew up in this tiny town in Louisiana. I was told from the time that I was old enough to listen to people that my life would be a failure, that I would never amount to anything. Well, I was a kid who learned to read on his own when he was about 4. I didn't even know how I learned to read. I assume it came from people reading me books and me just watching the words, the letters, kind of a Scout To Kill a Mockingbird kind of thing. But I don't really know. And even by the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I just resented that whole view of, hey, because your family lives under less than perfect circumstances, you yourself are not capable of succeeding in the world. So to me, trailer trash just sort of means, yeah, so what? I came from these circumstances. I've never let it knock me down, and I've never stopped. And the truth is, I have kind of fond memories of the trailer we lived in. And I like to talk about terrors. So the name of this show is Trailer Trash Terrors. And until I find something better, that's going to remain the name.
Has it been difficult to learn to produce podcasts? What are some of the challenges you have faced?
Yes, I've had to face some challenges. Podcasting is not all that different from doing video production, which I have done, although not at a professional level. But here are some of the challenges. First off, finding something to talk about, if you're not an absolute expert in an area, is kind of a problem. So for instance, I could create a podcast all about simulation or statistics or various types of architecture or being a father or quite a few things. But I'm not sure that anybody would want to listen to them, and I don't think I would have fun doing them. So my idea was, okay, there's this paranormal world out there, at least in the podcasting realm. Let me see if I can find a little bit different approach to it. And the truth is, when I'm thinking about who I am, when I became a human, I find myself thinking more and more about Louisiana when I was a child. That was the most fascinating place I've ever been. That was where I became me. Other challenges, let's see. Software. The audio production software is not in a good state. It's expensive. It is made almost specifically for music production. There is a product called Hindenburg, but in finding it, I found it very limited. I tried 3 or 4 or 5 different software packages and finally decided that even though it's costly on an annual basis, the very, very best package by a long way is Adobe Audition. And that's what I use. That's what my fellow podcaster JJ over at Southern Demonology uses. And I have a feeling it's probably what most people who do this seriously end up using. Let's see, equipment. I already had the equipment necessary to do this. I've got multiple microphones, and I started off using a Shure SM7B, But what I found was that with my particular voice, it was just really hard to make it not be incredibly bass heavy. So now I'm using an NT1A and an Audient audio interface, and I'm pretty pleased with it. I'm not entirely happy, and like most perfectionists, I'm not sure I ever will be entirely happy.
What's up with all the swamp sounds and music? Don't you find that cheesy?
Do I find it cheesy? Well, I guess the better question is cheesy a bad thing? I wanted this podcast to have a feel. So think about various videos, movies that you see. They personalize those movies with the way they do the color, with the way they do the sound, the costumes. A podcast is a harder thing to do. We don't have any visual cues. All we have are audible cues. So I use walking through the swamp sounds in the distance. I use the howling wolf. I use Loco Lobo guitar, which is awesome. You know, it has this swamp sound to it. It makes me happy just to listen to it. I think it's a very good addition to the show. So I use the swamp sounds, the swamp music, the Loco Lobo guitar, which I really like, to make a feel, create a world that's audibly inviting. Now, maybe not everybody agrees, but so far, people seem to like the whole swamp, Louisiana, backwoods, trailer trash kind of vibe.
What are some of the podcasts you admire? Why do you admire them? What are some podcasts you dislike?
I don't want to talk about podcasts I dislike. If I dislike them, I simply won't listen to them. I've listened to hundreds of different podcasts, some that are produced with an incredible degree of slickness, and some that are simply done on people's phones. Some of my favorite podcasts are the ones done on people's phones. Let's see if I can come up with a couple. One is Say What Again, Billy podcast. He's doing a little supernatural show. I think he works in a zoo. He doesn't have a lot of time to spend on this, and frankly, Billy doesn't have as much knowledge in the supernatural area as many other people do. But he enjoys it, and you can tell when you listen to him how happy it makes him to do this podcast. I listened to a podcast a while back that I don't think is still being done anymore. I'm hoping it's not being done because it's no longer needed. The podcast was called The Depression Diaries, and it was an individual talking about his path through depression. I thought he did a very good job on it. I sent him some material that he ended up using. But the reason I liked that podcast was simply because it was so raw and personal and honest. I mean, he really talked about the difficulties of living life under depression, which, like many of us, is something that I've suffered. I guess the podcast that I listen to or I look forward to the most when it comes on is Monsters Among Us. He does a very good job with that. Now, he does some funny things. First off, he's always graveling his voice. I'd end up with a sore throat after every show if I did that. Strange Things with Frank James is a good podcast. He does a good job with that. I would really like to get in touch with Frank and see if he and I could talk. I'd like to even debate him on a couple of things. He's somehow moved into the moon landing denial camp, which is one of the positions that just drives me nuts. There's a podcast called In the Dark by Tracy Bush, and I think she does that podcast in her car, just on her phone, and sometimes you'll hear the phone buzz or ring, but still, she does a good job. See, that's the magic of podcasting. You can be anybody, and you can put out a show with a little bit of effort, with a little bit of care, and with some passion. You can make something that people want to listen to. There used to be a podcast called Sass What, which was a father and a son doing a podcast about Bigfoot. I like that a lot. One of the reasons I liked it so much was you could hear the interplay between the father and the son, how much they loved each other, how much they cared about each other. That was awesome. It made me happy to hear it. Monster Quest is generally a good show to listen to. Of course, that's coming from the utterly skeptical view of things, but it's really well done, especially the woman from Australia. I like that show a great deal. Once a podcast gets to the point where it's mainstream, I find that I don't find it as enjoyable. So, for instance, Aaron Mahnke, Lore, great podcast, does an incredible job. He's very, very, very slick and very talented. But after a while, the slickness and the cold professionalism of the whole thing, and that's the wrong word. There's nothing wrong with being professional, but it does become somewhat sterile, somewhat cold. I don't tend to like podcasts where they spend most of the podcast just bantering. I do prefer that there be a topic that people try to talk about and that they try to focus on. I do like when just standard people in the community who are calling on their phone or sending in a recording, I like listening to them a lot. I think that you get to know a lot about people by listening to those candid conversations. Frankly, that's one of the reasons that I find myself still in the camp that Bigfoot is probably a genuine phenomenon. And that is simply because of the thousands of people who call these shows with their own personal stories. And I've listened to stories like this for years and years, starting back in the ER, and I think I've developed an ability to tell when someone is just lying, when they're throwing up garbage. And a lot of these people maybe didn't fully understand exactly what they were seeing, but they're not reporting falsehoods. They're telling you the truth. They're telling you what they saw. Anyway, I guess that covers it for the most part. I still will dig down deep into the podcast pile when you look on Apple Podcasts and just find very strange things. Some of them I will only listen to a part of an episode. I don't like drugs. I don't like drug-positive podcasts, although I fully support their right to do that. I heard a podcast that I was surprised was out there, and it had to do with trying to justify pedophilia. And I found that pretty offensive. I am very protective of the innocent parts of the world.
Do you feel that your podcast should be more in your face and controversial? Why do you not delve into conspiracy theories?
I don't think I'm really the right person to pull off the in-your-face controversial style. It's much more my tendency to try to be kind, to try to be polite, to try to engage people on an intellectual basis. Now, I don't have an absolute aversion to talking about conspiracy theories. It's just that when you do, it's very, very hard to get out of that rabbit hole. So, for instance, if you were to take a talk show and you start talking about the Earth being flat, well, pretty soon you're going to attract people who are fanatically committed to the Earth being flat. And you're going to attract people who hate those people. I think pretty quickly, with most conspiracy theories, any actual exchange of meaningful ideas goes away. I've seen this firsthand. One of the conspiracy theories that I find most repugnant is the 911 truth movement. I met Richard Gage many years ago, back when I was functioning as an architect. And I tried to engage him in some just architectural discussion. Things like, well, wait a minute, let's talk about when steel starts behaving in a plastic manner. He was there with several of his, I guess you'd call them colleagues, cohorts. And they simply would not talk about things like the scientific, the physical behavior of steel. They were agenda-driven to the point that the facts no longer mattered. And I think most conspiracy theorists are like this. One of the conspiracy theories that I probably will spend some time delving into is the still surviving idea that the moon landings were hoaxed. These are some very, very odd people. Many of them deny that space exists. It's a very strange group of humanity, part of humanity. We live in a world now where almost on a weekly basis, we're seeing a SpaceX rocket or some other rocket take something to space. We can generally just watch it go there. What we're also seeing now are these rockets come back. They land. You can watch them land or on a ship. Their landing accuracy has just become astounding. And there are people who simply say, this never happened. Well, I can remember reading one time about the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers, had created their plane and Kitty Hawk, and within a few years, they were routinely flying planes all across the country. They had mostly moved their operations to Ohio. But there were people who would, with great gusto and great devotion, get on the newspapers, talk about how nothing is flying in the air. There are no heavier-than-air flights. I swear you could take those people and put them on a plane, fly them up in the air, take them all across the country, and they would still say, nope, that wasn't a flight. I just don't understand how human minds allow themselves to become that addled. And they're not fun to talk to. I do love to talk about things that happened a long time ago, things that are still mysteries. For instance, Spring Heel Jack. That really happened. There's no question there was a Spring Heel Jack. There were probably multiple people who took on that moniker. I'm not at all sure about what happened there, and a lot of people aren't. I've seen some really great fictional approaches to it, where Spring Heel Jack was a velociraptor or a Utah raptor that had been lost in time and ended up in London. That's great fun. That's not a conspiracy. That's speculation. Some of my shows are fictional. Some of my shows are absolutely true. Some of them are fictionalized accounts of true events. Some of them are just direct reporting of things that were in newspapers 100, 150 years ago, just because I find them interesting. If I ever get to the point where I don't find doing this show fun, I don't find doing this show interesting, I won't do it anymore. That would be a disservice to myself, a disservice to whatever audience I'm able to gain, and a disservice to my inner ideas of integrity and goodness.
Rapid fire question number 1. Do you believe in God?
Without question, and with every bit of my heart and soul. I am to the point in my life where one can never be certain that there's a God. It's intellectually dishonest to say so. But it's equally dishonest to say that one is certain that there is no God. What I have seen in my life, working in hospitals, dealing with my children, dealing with other children, dealing with triumph and failure, thinking, walking, hiking, spending probably literally 5 years of my life thinking about this question. Yes, I believe there is God. I believe there is a God. I believe that God cares about us. I believe that we have obligations to that God. I believe God is composed of characteristics that we can't fully understand. And I believe that we have created a situation on earth where I'm not sure that God is fully willing to extend his grace to humanity. That scares me. That worries me.
Rapid fire question number 2. Have you ever had any direct paranormal experiences?
That's a very difficult question to answer with certainty. I don't think so. At least not something that I can prove to anyone else was paranormal. I have had a few things happen that I don't fully understand. Most of them were things that happened when I was working in nursing. I did 3 episodes of Southern Demonology where I told them about experiences with people whom I felt to be perfectly possessed. These were frightening, horrifying people. These were experiences that I very much hope to never, ever have to repeat. But was I dealing with actual demonic activity? Or was I simply dealing with horrible people? I don't know. I've had a number of things happen that seem somewhat precognitive. Once again, hundreds of people do. You know, what is it when a mother wakes up at 3 in the morning when her son, who hasn't visited her in a year, is showing up early that day? I don't know. I do believe that minds are connected. I'm not sure how, and I don't spend a lot of time worrying about that. I think it's possible that I effected an instance of telekinesis when I was a child, in that I certainly believe it's possible that I made a coin disappear. Now, that seems a very strange thing to talk about, but I did. There was a magician who came to our house, and he was a prestidigitator, somebody who could do great things with his hands. He could make a coin disappear and pull it out from behind your ear. I had no idea that these were tricks, and so I would spend all day, every day, with a coin in my hand, closing my fist, asking other people to hold out their hands, opening my hand, and then having it fall out. Well, one time, it didn't fall out. My sister was there. She saw it. What happened there? My goodness, I don't know. I mean, the scientist in me says, what's more likely? That I'm not remembering something correctly? That I perceived something that didn't happen? Or that I fully broke the laws of physical causality? Well, it's very clear what's most probable. The fact that I'm just remembering something that didn't happen, or I am misinterpreting something that did happen. I have been in 2 places where I found that I felt that the presence of evil was so intense that I simply couldn't stay there. So I left. Now, was that paranoia on my part? Was that just the normal awareness of somebody's body signals, of their body language? I don't know. And I think that most paranormal things are like this. It's extremely difficult, I think, to document any of these things. I always get a kick out of the paranormal ghost shows where, you know, they'll go to some abandoned hospital in the middle of, you know, Russia or someplace, and they're walking around this poor derelict hospital hoping to find something, hoping to find a ghost. And then they see a shadow or a mist or just something down at the end of the hall, and they don't go down there and investigate. They just all immediately run away, screaming. I'm open to the possibility of experiencing something paranormal, but I don't really expect to.
Rapid fire question number 3. When you die, do you anticipate you will feel, in your heart of hearts, in that hidden, sacred place where a man cannot lie to himself, that your life was well lived?
Well, hot damn. You do go for the jugular, don't you? This is indeed where the DNA of truth is laid bare. How does a man honestly answer that question? You know, I guess I've seen probably, sometimes I try to estimate how many people I've seen die. It's in the thousands. You know, but years in ICU, years in ED, you see people die. You see people die all the time. You know, I remember a day in ICU or an ER where 3 tiny infants died in that ER on the same day. I mean, I'm talking less than 3 months old. And we never have anything like that happen. We ended up needing to use the rooms they were in, so we rolled a stretcher into the nurse's lounge, covered it with a thick blanket, and laid those 3 infants next to each other. So there were 3 dead infants next to each other on that gurney, on that stretcher. One of them we were trying very, very hard to get an IV in. We were trying scalp veins. Nobody wanted to do a central line among the physicians. So we were going to do an intraosseous IV. That's where what they'll do is they'll put a large needle directly into the bone. And especially with small children, you can infuse a lot of liquid that way. So it's a legitimate IV. It was my job to hold this infant's leg, one hand on his hip, one hand around his knee. And another physician was trying to insert a needle into the bone. Even on an infant, a bone is a very hard and difficult thing to penetrate. I remember with incredible clarity how that bone just snapped in two. It was just like a clean snap, like taking a stick and just snapping it in two. And I remember this feeling of, oh my God, did I do that? And I realized that certainly mechanically I did have something to do with it. There was no way of avoiding it. There was nothing that anybody could have done to keep that infant alive. But I can remember thinking, are we going to be held responsible by God because these 3 infants died on our watch? I came to believe that, I know I did, and I think everybody there did everything they could to keep those babies alive. And if you stop and think about it, those deaths, aside from the fact that they're tiny humans, are no more significant than any of the hundreds of other deaths we would see in that ED on a daily or continuing basis. So I used to say to people, when someone 90 dies, someone who's lived a long, productive, meaningful life, that's not a tragedy. That's a part of life. That's sadness. You're going to miss that person, but it isn't tragic. It's a part of life. When a 9-year-old dies, or an 8-year-old dies, someone who's never had a chance to live at all dies, that's a tragedy. And we would see those on a fairly frequent basis. So I have, I guess like most people, dozens of things in my life that I look back on and say, gosh, I wish I'd done that differently. Or, man, I'm very ashamed of that having happened. In most cases, when I have been able to, I've apologized to the people that I wronged, and I've done what I can to make up for it, to provide remediation. Now, the problem is that many, many times there's just nothing you can do other than offer an apology. And, of course, they're under no obligation to accept your apology. Hurting other people, making those mistakes in life, we carry it with us. And even if we've apologized to the person and felt remorse inside and asked God, depending on your belief in God, for forgiveness, for myself, going to the sacrament of confession, I think we will be held to answer for it. Honestly, I don't want to hasten my death at all, but I understand how judgmental men can be, humans can be, and I really don't know if I judge myself reasonably or not. And so I guess I hope one day that I do stand in the judgment of God and hear God's judgment on me. If it is, you have failed, you are not worthy of the kingdom of God, go elsewhere, well, at least that's a situation that I can look at and say, at least I understand. I know what the situation is. I don't have to wonder in my mind. I also think that I've done a number of things that are reasonably important. I've raised sons. I've saved far more lives than I allowed to slip through my fingers. I've been a willing listening ear for hundreds of people. I'm not a saint. I'm like most of us, a clear sinner. So the answer to your question is, will I think my life was well lived? I'm going to say probably not. I don't think that I have lived my life up to the potential that God expects of me. And I'm haunted by that. Now, the thing is, we continue to have chances every day to fix that situation. I think of the movie Gandhi, where there was a Hindu man who had come to Gandhi during Gandhi's hunger strike. He's fairly close to death. And the Hindu man comes to him and he gives him water, or he gives him juice or something. Here, drink this. I don't want to have your death on my hands too. He says, while there was rioting, there was a Muslim boy in the street, and I struck him in the head and I killed him. And now I'm going to hell. And Gandhi says, I know a way out of hell. And the man listens and he says, find a little boy about this high and raise him as your own. But be sure that you raise him as a Muslim every day of his life and love him just as you would your own child. Would I be capable of something like that? I might be. I think it's a very, very problematic thing to start thinking of yourself as being an extremely good and kind person. Humans are so good at fooling ourselves, at allowing ourselves to buy into a fantasy, to allow ourselves to buy into a set of circumstances that just isn't representative of reality. It's really one of the biggest problems we have as entities. So, I guess I haven't answered the question very well. The final answer would be, I hope so, and I keep striving to make that possible. That's the best I can do, Boudreaux.
Rapid fire question. The last. When have you been the most frightened?
That's a question I can answer straight up. When my younger son was about 2.5, maybe 3, we were doing a sandcastle contest in Galveston. I worked for an architecture firm, and we had gone to the beach. It was myself, my wife, my older son, and my younger son. And my older son was pretty fascinated with the whole process of building the sandcastle. He kind of liked to hang around me and, put sand in a bucket and act like he was helping build the sandcastle. My younger son was supposed to stay with my wife. And somehow, I don't really know what happened, she fell asleep or looked away, and he was gone. I went back to where my wife was. We looked for Connor. I ran all around. I, made a circuit of, say, 100 yards from where their blanket had been, and he was nowhere to be found. So the question was, did he drown? Has he just walked away and somebody picked him up and he's fine? Did someone take him? What has happened to our son? So, what came after that was about an hour of controlled panic. I mean, believe me, everything in my heart, everything in my brain, everything in my mind wanted to panic. But I couldn't. I had to find that little boy. So we went to the control area. They had DJs there. We had them announce his name over their PA system, which you could barely hear. I talked to everybody I could, saying, look, if you see a little boy wandering around, please pick him up and take him to the control area. About a mile and a half down the beach, heading southward. This is Galveston Beach, so it's more or less running north and south. One of the people in my office had picked up a little boy. It was Kimmy. And she said, hey, is this yours? And Connor was just crying. And so I ran over and held him, and all I remember is holding on to him as close as I could for easily 5 minutes. And I'm sure that he was getting hot. I'm sure that he really wanted me to let go. But I wasn't letting go. I was going to make sure my body remembered that my son was back with us. And so then we walked back down to where our sandcastle castle was, and we left. He didn't want to leave. Now that the panic of being lost was over, he wanted to stay at the beach and have fun. I was okay until we got home. And that was the closest I think I've ever come to having a panic attack. I was shaking. I went into the bathroom and retched for quite a while, feeling that I was certainly going to throw up, and came back out and tried to be the best dad I could. Now, I've been frightened for both of my children, for multiple people that I love. I was frightened for the safety of my family. I guess a little bit for myself when I was younger. I don't remember ever feeling frightened that I might die. But I did not want to face life without my younger son. I would have. I would have had another son and a wife to care for. But that would have been such a incredible piece of brightness and joy and innocence and wonder taken from the world. It would have been a genuine blow to not just the fabric of my life, but I think the fabric of the world.
Vic Hermanson, I feel I can sense fatigue in your voice, and I believe we are reaching a natural stopping point. Again, I use that word believe. Sapience is, indeed, difficult. I hope I have done a good job as the host of the bonus episode. I can easily detect deception in people's voices, and I want to thank you for answering my questions with such radical honesty. Until it is needed again, it is time to exit the helix.
I'm going to say that is the very best interview by disembodied, sapient, self-aware, intelligence, cybernetic ghost from the future I've ever heard. I doubt if I will ever hear a better one unless Boudreaux improves upon himself. It's time to close out the bonus episode. Going to close it out slightly differently tonight. This is Trailer Trash Terrors, Season 1, the bonus episode. Trailer Trash Terrors is written and produced by me, Vic Hermanson, with a great deal of help from Boudreaux. He really does help me think through things. The music you heard was courtesy of Loco Lobo and Smart Sound. Season 2 is coming up. Please rate and share. And also, please contact me at trailertrashterrors@gmail.com Tonight, we're going to end with a poem, just because I'm tired of all the sadness. I'm tired of all the depth. I'm tired of all the emotional drama. So, tonight we're going to end the show with The Cremation of Sam McGee by Robert W. Service. It's a lot of fun. Good night. I first heard this poem when I was about 10, and I remember listening to it over and over and over again. It was on a cassette that had something to do with the history of the Yukon or the history of Alaska, and I just found it fun. The name of the poem is The Cremation of Sam McGee. It's by a poet named Robert W. Service, and I'll do my best to try to make it sound decent. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was the night on the marge of Lake Lebarge. I cremated Sam McGee. Now Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. Why he left his home in the south to roam round the pole, God only knows. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell, though he'd often say, in his homely way, that he'd sooner live in hell. On a Christmas day, we were mushing our way over the Dawson Trail. Talk of your cold, through the parka's fold, it stabbed like a driven nail. If our eyes would close, then the lashes froze, till sometimes we couldn't see. It wasn't much fun, but the only one to whimper was Sam McGee. And that very night as we lay packed tight in our robes beneath the snow, and the dogs were fed, and the stars o'erhead were dancing heel and toe, he turned to me and, "Cap," says he, "I'll cash in this trip, I guess, and if I do, I'm asking that you won't refuse my last request." Well, he seemed so low that I couldn't say no. Then he says with a sort of moan, "It's the cursed cold, and it's got right hold, till I'm chilled clean through to the bone. Yet 'tain't being dead, it's my awful dread of the icy grave that pains. So I want you to swear that foul or fair, you'll cremate my last remains." A pal's last need is a thing to heed, so I swore I would not fail. And we started on at the streak of dawn, but God, he looked ghastly pale. He crouched on the sleigh, and he raved all day of his home in Tennessee. And before nightfall, a corpse was all that was left of Sam McGee. There wasn't a breath in that land of death, and I hurried hard-driven, with a corpse half hid that I couldn't get rid because of a promise given. It was lashed to the sleigh, and it seemed to say, "You may tax your brawn and brains, but your promise true, and it's up to you to cremate those last remains." Now a promise made is a debt unpaid, and the trail has its own stern code. In the days to come, though my lips were dumb, in my heart how I cursed that load. In the long, long night, by the lone firelight, while the huskies round in a ring howled out their woes to the homeless snows. Oh God, how I loathed that thing. And every day that quiet clay seemed to heavy and heavier grow, and on I went, though the dogs were spent, and the grub was getting low. The trail was bad, and I felt half mad, but I swore I would not give in, and I'd often sing to the hateful thing, and it hearkened with a grin. Till I came to the marge of Lake Lebarge, and a derelict there lay. It was jammed in the ice, but I saw in a trice it was called the Alice May. And I looked at it, and I thought a bit, and I looked at my frozen chum. Then here, said I, with a sudden cry, is my crematorium. Some planks I tore from the cabin floor, and I lit the boiler fire. Some coal I found that was lying around, and I heaped the fuel higher. The flames just soared, and the furnace roared, such a blaze you seldom see, and I burrowed a hole in the glowing coal, and I stuffed in Sam McGee. Then I made a hike, for I didn't like to hear him sizzle so, and the heavens scowled, and the huskies howled, and the wind began to blow. It was icy cold, but the hot sweat rolled down my cheeks, and I don't know why, and the greasy smoke, in an inky cloak, went streaking down the sky. I do not know how long in the snow I wrestled with grisly fear, but the stars came out, and they danced about, ere again I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but I bravely said, I'll just take a peek inside. I guess he's cooked, and it's time I looked. Then the door I opened wide. And there sat Sam, looking cool and calm, in the heart of the furnace roar, and he wore a smile you could see a mile, and he said, Please close that door. It's fine in here, but I greatly fear you'll let in the cold and storm. Since I left Plum Tree, down in Tennessee, it's the first time I've been warm. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was the night on the marge of Lake Labarge. I cremated Sam McGee.